The room smelled like bitter coffee and polished wood. Everyone wore their best smiles, plastic, stiff, camera-ready. The COO cleared his throat, then leaned toward the mic and said, "Let's be honest, she was making 80 grand to babysit spreadsheets. We're correcting that today." It took me a second to realize he meant me. Not just me, as in my department, my division. He meant Lisa Harper, 43 years old, 15 years in this building. The one sitting dead center in a navy blazer she'd worn for every major presentation since 2012. I froze, literally froze. My right hand still hovered over the edge of the conference table, where I just set down a notepad. The corner of it curled slightly, like even the paper was recoiling. I didn't blink, not yet. The overhead lights buzzed. A projector fan whirred, pushing heat into the stale air. Behind me, someone stifled a laugh and failed. It came out sharp, too sharp, like a knife grazing porcelain. No one turned. They didn't have to. Everyone knew what was happening. The new quarterly budget slide flicked up behind him, and there it was. Operations. Revised salary allocation $42,000. There was a slight delay before the ripple hit the room, like people needed a moment to do the math. And once they did, it wasn't outrage I saw. It was relief. Like they'd just watched someone else get picked off in a war zone they didn't want to be in. My eyes scanned the room slowly. Familiar faces looked away, just in time. Others pretended to adjust their blazers, check their tablets, anything but look me in the eye. They didn't need to say it. Their silence was loud enough. There was one face that didn't turn away. Julie. She was new, just 3 months in. Young, bright-eyed, still holding her pen like it mattered. She sat near the water cooler, half hidden behind 2 managers who had long since stopped believing in anything besides bonuses and bottom lines. Our eyes met for a split second. She didn't look sorry. She looked confused, like she couldn't understand why no one else was saying anything, why this room full of professionals had collectively decided that this was fine, acceptable, normal. Mark, the COO, moved on, as if slashing someone's livelihood in front of their peers didn't require pause, as if what he'd just done was no more complicated than adjusting a line item on a budget spreadsheet. Next, he said, we'll be redirecting some of that capital toward talent acquisition in markets that reflect current growth. Another click, another slide, more corporate doublespeak. No one asked questions, no one blinked. I shifted in my chair, my spine stiff, my breath shallow, my heart was slow. Not racing, not panicked, just steady. Too steady. And that scared me more than anything. Because when you've been blindsided, humiliated, and discarded in a matter of 30 seconds, you expect anger, tears, something. But all I felt was stillness, like part of me had already left the room before he even said the words. So I reached forward quietly and closed my notepad. No drama, no slamming things shut, just a soft, final click as the metal coil snapped shut between my fingers. I stood up. My chair scraped the polished floor louder than I wanted. But I didn't flinch. I just tucked my notepad under one arm, smoothed down my jacket, and walked toward the door. And just before I stepped out, I turned my head slightly, just enough to speak. Not loud, just loud enough. You'll need that 80 grand back soon enough. A few heads turned then, a few shoulders stiffened, but no one followed me. And I didn't look back. I used to have a key to the office, not a code or a badge, an actual key. Back when the door stuck if it rained and the copier jammed every other Tuesday. I was there when we couldn't afford coffee that wasn't bulk ordered in bricks. I brought my own filters from home. I labeled drawers. I created a folder system on the shared drive when everything was just named Final V3 and newest new.doc. People laughed then, but they used the folders. They used everything I built. Mark used to call me the backbone. He even wrote it on a post-it once, stuck to my monitor after a hellish week where 2 clients almost walked, and one of our interns accidentally deleted an entire database. I kept that note for years. We weren't friends, exactly, but there was a kind of professional trust that felt unshakable. He had vision. I had systems. It worked. The first crack came quietly. A new hire in strategy, young MBA, all sharp elbows and jargon. She called me old school in a meeting, smiled when she said it like it was a compliment. Mark laughed. Not loud, just enough. I noticed. Then came the restructure. I was moved from chief of operations to senior project analyst. No explanation. No transition plan, just a calendar invite with a new title and a smaller office further down the hall. They told me it was a streamlining effort, that titles weren't reflective of value. But somehow, the new strategy lead got my old corner window. And yet I stayed. I told myself it was temporary, that the pendulum would swing back, that they'd remember what I'd built when something went wrong. Something did go wrong. A systems migration failed, badly. Data lost, clients angry. I stayed late for a week cleaning it up. Quietly, no complaints. Mark never said thank you. He did send out a company-wide email praising team agility. He didn't mention my name. After that, it got quieter. They started CCing me instead of inviting me. I'd hear about meetings 2 hours after they happened. Calendars shifted. Recurring calls I used to run vanished like smoke. One day, I walked into a quarterly planning session and found someone else in my seat. Not metaphorically, literally. A new chair with a nameplate that wasn't mine. I stood there for a second. No one said anything. Not even Mark. So I sat 3 rows back, took notes, said nothing. When they presented a new workflow model, almost identical to the one I'd proposed last year, I waited for someone to mention it. My version had been called overbuilt. This one? Forward thinking. Still I stayed. Some nights I'd sit in the break room alone, sipping tea long gone cold, watching through the window as the others left in pairs, laughing. Not cruel. Just unbothered. I'd become background. Julie started showing up around then. Bright. Soft-spoken. Too green to see the politics, at first. She asked thoughtful questions in meetings, never overstepped. Reminded me of myself, years ago. She once stopped me in the hallway to say, "Your templates are the only reason I know what's going on here." It was meant as gratitude, but I felt the sting under it. My legacy, reduced to documents. Still, I answered every question she brought. Showed her how to trace broken chains in the supply system. How to flag misalignments in client accounts. Quietly, off the record. One evening, well after most had gone home, I passed her desk. She was squinting at a spreadsheet, muttering to herself. I leaned in gently and said, "The color codes are linked to the pivot filters. You're editing in the wrong view." She blinked. "Oh, wow, thank you." And then she said carefully, "They really don't make it easy for you, do they?" I smiled, not the kind that says, "You're wrong." The kind that says, "You're finally starting to see it." That moment lodged in me. Not because of what she said, but because she noticed. They thought they'd made me small. That by trimming my title, shaving my salary, isolating me from decision-making, they could erase my impact. What they didn't know was that the foundation still bore my fingerprints, and the only reason it hadn't cracked yet was because I was still holding it together. It happened on a Thursday. Funny how the big moments don't announce themselves. They arrive quiet, almost bored, like they'd been waiting for you to notice. The whole company was gathered in the auditorium. Quarterly alignment meeting. What used to be my job to run. Now I sat 4 rows back, with a plastic badge that said, Operations Support. Not even senior. Mark was on stage, flanked by 2 execs from the New York office. Slick suits, blinding teeth. One of them had a laser pointer. The other had that tone, calculated warmth, like he'd been trained to sound friendly without meaning a word. They were unveiling something called Future Core 2.0. A restructuring plan. Streamlined verticals. Clearer accountability. More agile responsiveness. The whole thing was buzzwords and backpats. And then came the part where they listed outdated redundancies. That's when I heard it. Some support functions will be consolidated. Non-client-facing operations, for instance. Roles that primarily serve an internal comfort function. I felt my lungs pause mid-breath. Comfort function. That's what they called the structure that kept their payroll clean, their vendor chain intact, their back-end contracts from collapsing in litigation. Me. They meant me. And then Mark said it. Still smiling. Still pretending we were all on the same team. We thank those who've helped us get this far. But to grow, we can't carry the weight of nostalgia. There was a silence, brief but sharp. The kind of silence that clutches your spine and twists. I turned slightly, just enough to see if anyone else felt what I felt. They didn't, or if they did, they hid it. Even Julie looked frozen, her jaw stiff, pen caught mid-scribble. For a moment, I almost stood, almost said something. But then, I didn't. Not out of fear, but because I saw Mark look at me, and then look past me, as if I had already left. That was the moment. Not when they slashed my title, Not even when they cut my pay. It was when he stopped seeing me as human. That's when I knew this wasn't personal anymore. This was systemic. And the system, it was breaking. I went home that night without saying goodbye. I didn't even turn on the lights when I got inside. I just sat in the dark with my shoes still on and my coat still zipped, like if I didn't move, it wouldn't be real yet. I kept hearing it. We can't carry the weight of nostalgia. They meant people like me, people who remembered when the company had heart. I thought about quitting. Not out of defeat, more like resignation, like watching a house slowly rot from the end, realizing you can't keep repainting the outside to make it livable again. I even started a resignation letter. Got as far as after 15 years of service before deleting the whole thing. But then, something stopped me. Not anger, not pride, it was Julie. She had looked at me during that meeting, really looked. She didn't smile, didn't write okay, the way people do when they want to feel like they care but don't want to get involved. No. Her eyes said something else. They said, "This isn't right." And that stayed with me longer than the insult. So the next day I didn't quit. I showed up at 8 a.m. sharp, brought my own coffee, sat at my desk and pulled up the documentation backlog, the one no one had touched in years because it wasn't urgent. And I started cleaning. Every contract, every invoice, every change log, quietly, relentlessly. Because while they were busy making slides and throwing around words like agility, they'd forgotten something important. I knew how everything fit together, and I knew exactly what would fall apart when the wrong piece got moved. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't delete files or leak emails, but I stopped buffering their mistakes. When a new junior PM sent out an error-ridden client report, I let it go through. When a budget code got swapped in the procurement sheet, I didn't intercept it. One by one, the seam started to strain, and no one could figure out why. Meanwhile, I watched, observed, waited. And when Julie came to my desk one afternoon with wide eyes and whispered, "Lisa, they're asking who used to handle the compliance summaries. They said they thought it was automated." I just smiled, stood up slowly and said, "It never was, but thanks for telling me." I walked straight down the hallway, past the glass offices, past the whiteboards full of jargon and half-baked plans. And right before I reached the executive wing, I stopped, because I didn't need to go in there. Not yet. They weren't ready for the storm they'd started, but I was. The room was silent, but it wasn't the calm kind. It was the kind of silence that weighs on your chest, where you can feel every glance cutting into your skin like glass. The quarterly board meeting had been scheduled with vague importance, but I knew better. The agenda said, "Future Leadership Strategy." What it meant was, "Farewell, Lisa." Mark stood confidently at the front of the glass-paneled conference room, arms folded, grinning. "We're here to announce the firm's next chapter," he began, with a glance at the board. "A leaner, sharper, more forward-facing company, one that reflects where we're going, not where we've been." He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. He clicked the remote. On the screen behind him, a title flashed, "Operational Restructure, Executive Changes." He smirked. "After many valuable years, Lisa will be transitioning out of day-to-day operations." I stood up. The chair scraped back across the floor like a warning bell. I didn't wait for the murmurs to settle. I didn't wait for anyone's permission. I walked right to the head of the table, Mark's seat, and I placed both palms flat on the polished surface. "I'm not transitioning anywhere," I said quietly. "I'm here, and I'm not going to sit through another meeting where you try to rewrite my history." Mark blinked, his smile twitching. "I've watched you stand here and steal every plan I spent months building," I continued. "I watched you call my decisions too emotional, and then implement them behind my back once a man suggested them. And now you want to transition me out?" "No." I turned to the board members. "You deserve the truth before you make any decisions. Because what he won't tell you is that I built the infrastructure keeping this company profitable during our worst quarter. I retained 3 major clients when our legal lead walked out. I cut waste by 18% while he was too busy schmoozing at networking dinners." The room was frozen. Mark laughed nervously. "Lisa, this isn't the time or place." "This is exactly the time and place," I snapped. "You've done everything to make me smaller. You cut my salary by nearly half without a conversation. You removed my name from internal reports. You told junior staff not to loop me in, and still, I stayed. I kept doing the work, because I believed in this company. I took a breath. But believing in something doesn't mean letting it destroy you. Silence. Then a soft voice broke the stillness. She's telling the truth. I turned. It was Grace, our in-house counsel. She never spoke in meetings unless asked. But now she stood up slowly, a folder in her hands. I was asked to draw up a transition memo, she said. Mark told me it was agreed upon, said Lisa had stepped down voluntarily. But I never got any signed confirmation. And I didn't feel right about it. She walked forward and placed the folder next to mine. I made a copy. Mark turned pale. That's confidential. Grace looked him in the eye. So was Lisa's salary, Mark. But you sure had no problem discussing that behind her back. My heart was pounding. Not from fear, but from the realization that I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I looked around the room, at the board members, at the silent executives who had once been quick to smile when Mark entered, and even quicker to ignore me. Their expressions were shifting now, not fast but unmistakably. The kind of shift that begins at the corners of the mouth, a slight tension in the brow, recognition, guilt, fear. Mark's voice cracked. This is completely out of line. Lisa's angry because she didn't adapt. The industry is changing. She refused to change with it. No, I said, my voice low but clear. I refuse to flatter you while you buried everything this company stood for under self-promotion. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a slim blue folder. I wasn't going to do this today, but you pushed me here. I placed it on the table and slid it toward the chairman. This is a proposal, a legal one. I've had it reviewed for months. It outlines a buyout agreement using shares I acquired over the past 12 years. While you were playing the public face of this company, I was quietly becoming one of its largest stakeholders. Mark went dead silent. I used my severance reduction to buy shares when you thought it would humiliate me, I continued. I built a holding under a different name, and 2 months ago, I finalized a silent partnership with 2 of our biggest outside investors. I turned slowly toward him. Effective this morning, you are no longer the acting CEO. The boardroom didn't erupt. It inhaled, and then everything began unraveling. 2 members stood up. One of them, an older woman named Gwen, adjusted her glasses and addressed the room. Lisa approached us in private, calmly, with documents and projections. She didn't ask for revenge. She asked what was best for the company, and I listened, because unlike some people, she's earned the right to speak. Mark tried to laugh, but it was dry, empty. This is a coup. You're all fools. You think she can run this place better than me? I didn't flinch. I already did, for years. Another voice joined from the far end of the table. I saw the HR emails, said Daniel, our head of finance. I knew something wasn't right, but I was too afraid to say it. You used fear as management, Mark. She used trust. You were loud. She was consistent. Mark turned to the door, fumbling with his phone. This isn't over. My attorney will hear about this. You're free to call them, said the chairman, his tone measured. But as of this moment, the board recognizes Lisa as interim CEO pending shareholder review. You'll be escorted off-site after this meeting. Mark's shoulders deflated like someone had finally pulled the air out of him. No shouting, no fighting. Just nothing left to say. He started walking toward the door, then paused halfway through, looking at me over his shoulder. Enjoy the corner office, he said bitterly. Let's see how long you last in it. I smiled. Not smug, not sweet, just steady. I built that office, and then I sat down at the head of the table, for the first time, in my own seat. The silence after my presentation didn't last long. I could feel the shift before I heard it, before the rustle of papers, the shifting chairs, the tightened throats. It was in the air, like a sudden drop in temperature. Cold, electric. The boardroom, just minutes ago filled with polite applause for Jordan's bloated speech, was now a forest of narrowed eyes and murmured disbelief. They had seen the footage, they had read the contracts, they had heard Jordan's voice, plain and clear, forging timelines and manipulating margins. And I stood at the head of the room, not because someone invited me there, but because I walked there, because I chose to. Jordan tried to speak, tried to recover with some polished executive jargon, but his voice faltered, then cracked, then stopped. Because the CEO, who had flown in from out of state for this quarterly meeting, raised his hand. "Jordan," he said evenly, "step outside." You could hear a pin drop. No one dared move. Jordan stood still for a moment, eyes darting like a cornered animal. He opened his mouth to protest, but the CEO's gaze stayed fixed. I said, "Step out." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Jordan left. No laptop, no swagger, just the door clicking shut behind him. That was the sound of his world changing. The CFO, who had once conveniently forgotten to copy me on major budget decisions, turned a deep shade of regret. She didn't say a word, just shifted in her seat and refused to meet my eyes. I didn't need her apology. Not anymore. What mattered was what came next. The CEO turned to me, and with a tone that surprised even himself, he asked, "How long have you known?" I looked around the room, pausing on every face that had once looked through me like I was background noise. "Long enough to build something better," I said quietly. Then I reached into my bag, not for a USB, not this time, but for a folder, a single manila folder. I handed it to him. "This is my offer." Because I didn't just come to expose someone, I came to take the reins. The CEO opened the folder right there in front of everyone. Inside was a detailed proposal. My plan to acquire the firm's underperforming East Coast division, one they'd long debated shutting down, and turn it into a specialized consultancy. I had already filed the paperwork. The funding? Quietly secured through private equity contacts I'd built over the last 11 months. I had come prepared not to beg for my old job back, but to offer them a way forward that didn't include Jordan, or any of the dead weight that had tried to sabotage me. The CEO leafed through the document slowly, his expression unreadable at first. Then gradually, a small nod. Then another. Finally, he looked up and said what I never expected to hear in that room again. "Can you stay after the meeting? Let's talk options." Around the table, heads turned. A few old colleagues looked stunned. One of the associates, who once laughed when I got demoted, mouthed something under her breath and slid her phone face down on the table. I didn't smile. Not then. But inside, something softened. Not satisfaction. Something deeper. Relief. Because for the first time in a long time, I had stopped playing their game and built my own board. Jordan never came back into that meeting. By the following Monday, a formal investigation was launched. Mismanagement of budgetary approvals, manipulation of bonus structures, and even collusion with 2 outside vendors. It wasn't just internal drama anymore. It was now legal. He resigned before they could finish the review. His exit email was short, cold, and ignored by most. The CFO submitted her own resignation quietly 2 weeks later to pursue other opportunities. No party, no cake, just a cardboard box and a stiff handshake by the security guard. And me, I didn't return to my old office. Instead, I walked into the downtown building I now leased, my own firm. Same field, different culture. Built on integrity, on memory, on the lessons they tried to bury me under. One afternoon, as I was reviewing new client portfolios, I got an email. It was from Taylor, the young analyst who'd spoken up for me during the boardroom showdown. All it said was, "Thank you for showing us what real leadership looks like." I sat back in my chair, and this time I did smile. Some mornings, I still wake up at 5:45. Not because I need to. God knows no one's waiting for a budget spreadsheet from me anymore. But because it's etched in my bones. 16 years of being the first to show up, the last to leave. 16 years of carrying a company on my back. And for what? I used to think I had to earn my worth in decimal points. That if my title wasn't printed in bold under the company masthead, I somehow hadn't arrived. I let them measure me in performance reviews and salary bands. I let them shrink me. But now, I measure my days in peace. My mornings start slow. I sit on the porch of my lake cabin, coffee in hand, watching the mist roll over the water like a blanket pulled tight. There's a softness to this life I never thought I'd be allowed to feel. No buzz of Slack, no ding of a calendar invite, just bird song, wind in the trees, and the sound of my own breathing, finally not rushed. A few weeks ago, I ran into Helen, the junior associate who once whispered, "I don't think they see you, but I do." She's at a new firm now. She asked if I'd come speak to their women's leadership circle. Said the team could use someone who's walked through the fire and come out kind. I said yes, not because I needed the validation, but because maybe someone sitting in the back of that room, staring down a silent demotion, would hear my story and choose differently. they might decide to walk away before they're broken. And that, maybe more than any ownership deal or financial comeback, is what I'm proudest of. That I didn't let bitterness shape me. That I didn't just win. I healed. And healing? That's a different kind of victory. Last week after the talk, a young woman, maybe in her late 20s, waited until the others had gone. She walked up, clutching a notebook so tight her knuckles were white. She didn't say much, just looked at me and asked, softly, "Do you think it ever stops hurting when they treat you like you don't matter?" And for a moment, I saw myself, 15 years ago, sitting in my car after work, gripping the steering wheel, willing the tears not to come. I wanted to reach back in time and hold her hand. I told her the truth. "No," I said, "not all the way. But one day you'll stop believing they were right, and that changes everything." She blinked hard, nodded, and smiled like someone who finally saw the edge of the storm. That's what healing looks like. Not loud, not perfect, but real. And maybe you, watching this, maybe you're still in that storm. Maybe they've cut your voice out of the room, shrunk your paycheck behind your back, or told you were lucky to even be here. Let me say this clearly. You are not what they called you. You are what you choose to become next. You're still here. That matters. So if this story found you tonight, I hope it reminded you. You don't need revenge. You need clarity. You need peace. And if you've ever been silenced, underestimated, or made to feel small at work, this story was for you. If you've been through something like this, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you know someone who needs this message today, share it with them. Stick around by subscribing. We tell stories that speak for those who've been quiet too long.